Okay, all right, well, thank you very much. All right, so today I will be talking about sharing best practices and collaborating to advance sustainable mobility. So next slide, please. The overview for my talk is as follows. So first I'm going to just briefly touch on sustainable transportation solutions. What solutions do we have at our fingertips to address many of the issues that face us today with respect to climate change, accessibility, and reliance on fossil fuels and our land use patterns. I'm also going to define shared mobility briefly, talk about changing perceptions, and then move on to opportunities for collaboration and provide some examples and success stories in the areas of transportation policy and planning, multimodal integration, accessibility for all, and then wrap up with growing collaboration and success for the future. Next slide, please. So sustainable transportation. In California, we focus a lot on this in the context of what strategies do we have for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And there's essentially three that we're really honing in on and focusing on in terms of the scoping plan for our greenhouse gas legislation, AB 32 here in California. And the three legs of the stool that we're focusing on include transportation and land use strategies, including transportation or transit-oriented development, shared mobility, pricing. We also have technology solutions like intelligent transportation systems and vehicles. And then finally, we have fuels like electric drive, biofuels, natural gas, and other types of fuels to help us reduce our climate footprint. Next slide, please. Shared mobility is something that I've been studying for a long time now, and I think it holds a lot of promise. This slide reflects my current framework for defining shared mobility, and it includes everything from traditional public transportation services such as buses and trains to ride-sharing services, van pools, car pools, the new shuttle services and existing shuttle services, ride sourcing or transportation network company services like Uber, Lyft, and Sidecar, and e-hail taxis. It also includes car sharing, bike sharing, scooter sharing in all of its many forms, and as well flexible goods movement strategies. Next slide, please. Changing perceptions, I think a lot of us are focusing on this today in our work. There's a lot of discussion these days about sustainability and what are we going to do about it, what policies are going to help us reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. There's also a lot of focus on smart cities and how people are going to be shifting more and more into megacity type platforms. How are we going to all live quality of life lives, and how are we going to make all of this happen? So that's a big part of, I think, changing perceptions today. Also, shared mobility and transportation demand management strategies are changing perceptions across the U.S. and the world. We're hearing more every day about the sharing economy, the notion of people accessing versus owning things, and access versus ownership. Access trumps ownership. We hear a lot about that. That was actually a phrase coined by Kevin Kelly. Shared mobility is spawning new business models practically every day, and we're finding through our research, particularly at UC Berkeley, that it is influencing individuals' transportation choices and behavior. And the final point I'd like to make on this slide is that I think this is going to continue to evolve and change, and that we should be expecting this and monitoring it and trying to learn how we can maximize the social and environmental benefits yielded from these opportunities. Next slide, please. Next, just click, Jeff, if you can. So this is the point of Kevin Kelly, who is a founder of Wired magazine. He said in 2009 that the trend is clear. Access trumps possession, and access is better than ownership. And if Jeffrey clicks that, ownership will pop up. And Kevin predicted this back in 2009, and he said that this is just getting started. And he was pointing to examples like Netflix and Zipcar. Next slide, please. These are just a series of studies that I wanted to reference, all available for free to be downloaded, that talk about these new trends and new directions. The one on the left focuses on new directions and relationships in terms of people's relationship with driving. The other publication to the right focuses on the new transportation apps as well as shared mobility. Next slide, please. This is a report on millennials and mobility. I actually served as expert on this particular study. It's really interesting, talks about how millennials think about transportation and living in urban areas. Next slide, please. And this is another report also produced by the U.S. PIRG and Frontier Group on millennials in motion and looking at their changing travel habits. And that one just came out this past fall. Next slide, please. So now moving to, I think, areas that we should be focusing on as we move forward. Transportation policy and planning, I think, is a huge area that we need to focus on. I think we can do a lot more with respect to shared mobility, connections to transit, and also transportation demand management, but we need more tools to do this. These are some really good examples, I think, of success stories in this space. The U.S. Green Business Council is incorporating shared mobility through the LEED certification program. It actually allows project-level certificates for incorporating ride-sharing, car-sharing, and bike-sharing into new development projects on a private basis. Also, we see local government getting involved in recognizing the importance of shared mobility into public rights-of-way. And different examples of this include on-street parking, provisions for street parking, waiting zones for shuttles and for Uber, Lyft, and sidecar type vehicles, and also free or reduced cost parking. Next slide, please. Multimodal integration. Some examples of this include bike sharing that's occurring at Caltrain stations here in the Bay Area, as well as you see this little figure below, bike sharing actually showing up on transit screens that show both transit schedules as well as availability of bike sharing. And that's a slide from Washington, D.C. Car sharing at metro stations, rail stations in Washington, D.C. Portland has option zones that facilitate biking and car sharing linkages. Car2Go is introduced in Portland, Oregon, bike racks actually on their Car2Go vehicles. And also we see loading zones for transportation network companies like UberX and Lyft at San Jose's International Airport, to just name a few examples of multimodal integration. Next slide, please. So mobility, I believe, is a fundamental right in terms of accessibility. I think it really does affect our social mobility as well as our physical mobility. And I think that's something that we also need to be focusing on. And I think the public and private sector can really work together to focus on these accessibility issues. And some examples of success stories here include New York's MTA has a flexible transit service called Access-a-Ride, and 72% of the vehicles are actually wheelchair accessible. Another service is called Lyft Hero, and that's in development here in San Francisco, and it allows users to hail for hire vehicle services with specially trained medical professionals. And Uber Assist also has specially trained drivers that aid drivers into and out of vehicles. They also manage wheelchairs, walkers, and scooters. Next slide, please. So this is my final slide, and wrapping up here, being the keynote for this incredible virtual TDM conference today, I really think as we move forward, we should be continuing this dialogue. And I applaud Jeffrey and Ride Amigos for putting together this virtual TDM webinar. I think it's the first one ever. And I think we need more of these. We need more workshops, virtual and in person, meetings in person, online, and also social media exchanges. I think we need to find common ground and goals between the public sector and the private sector for how to address technology barriers, increase these multimodal connections, embrace and understand accessibility issues for all populations and individuals, figure out how to streamline payments and profit sharing. And finally, if we can, streamline the collaborative process itself to grow the market. So here in California, we have a regulation called SB 375, which is focused on connecting land use and transportation with the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And as part of SB 375, there's several incentives that basically take some of the requirements out of the way if projects focus on smart transportation, like transit-oriented development. So those projects can be exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act processes and potentially really streamline and speed up those processes. So looking at ways that we can get rid of red tape and grow this market more rapidly. Next slide, please. And if you just click that, Jeffrey, my green leaf is going to come up. I want to thank everybody for your time today, and please follow me on Twitter. I'm constantly tweeting about the latest developments in shared mobility and automated vehicles. And with that, I turn it back to